would like to recognize Sophia West, CS West and Associates, PA. Let's just stand up so we give you a recognition so everybody can see you in person. It's so nice to see some smiling faces and everybody together. Again, thank you for being here. We're going to get started with our first speaker. We have a jam-packed morning and some great distinguished speakers. Our first speaker is an experienced nonprofit executive with experience in workforce development from policy in Washington, D.C., the state level and local implementation. He's passionate about his work and an accomplished public speaker. Ron Painter has served as the CEO of the National Association of Workforce Boards since 2009. As CEO, Mr. Painter has traveled throughout the country to meet with state and local workforce leaders to identify cutting-edge practices and programs and ways to implement innovative solutions in the workforce development through the NAWB members' nationwide job training system. Mr. Painter is also a member of the Manufacturing Skills Council, Skills Standards Council, the Advanced Robotics and Manufacturing Workforce Advisory Group, the Home Builders Institute Board, and the Perkins V National Evaluation Panel. Would you please welcome, and we're so proud that he's here today, Ron Painter, CEO and President of the National Association of Workforce Boards.
Hey, can you hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Couple things. Everybody, some of you that live here were commenting about how cold it was this morning. I flew in yesterday from Chicago. I'm headed tonight to Pittsburgh. So let me tell you, this is wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I do also have to say I'm a little discombobulated because this morning the panic set in. You know, this is like the first meeting after the holidays for me to be live, and I only brought one pair of pants. What a panic when I thought, holy God, what if it doesn't fit? So you almost had me in jeans. But the other thing I will say, I am a Pittsburgh boy. Really, if any of you are New York Jets fans, please hold that to yourself today. Anyway.
Joe Flacco's always finding a way to be.
I know, yeah. But, so anyway, it is good to be here, and I'm really happy that you're all together, because I think one of the things that when I'm up the hill, when I'm talking to the White House and the administration, one of the things that we really are anxious to recognize is that, okay, thanks Doug. So a little bit about us. We are I do work with the for the National Association of Workforce Boards, and as you are dues-paying members, we deeply appreciate that. One of the things that we do in terms of advocacy for the system is not only working on Capitol Hill with the administration, but also we do a whole lot of work with other associations in Washington, D.C. So I know somebody here is from healthcare, the American Hospital Association. We do work with them. We do a lot of work with CompTIA and Google and AWS and a number of national associations and large corporations that are trying to understand the system, trying to work with the system. So we do a lot of work with them. We do a lot of work with SHRM. A lot of conversations right now back and forth with SHRM around policy issues as we approach the 118th Congress. There are some big items on the agenda for the 118th, including the Higher Education Act and including WIOA 2.0, which we hope that they will get to. One of the things that I think as you go through the day is to remember that WIOA, and I think, Warren, you got to hang out and do this with JTPA and WIA, and then I got to work on WIOA and WIOA. And one of the things is that there is a recognition that talent is part of the global cachet. It is part of what drives economic recovery, economic growth across the globe. So there was this recognition that workforce development is a key part of economic development. You know, we were laughing last week as well, for a couple of reasons we were laughing about what was going on in Washington, but yeah, one of the things that had us amused was we argued long and hard on Capitol Hill that while the recovery funding was good, and while we really appreciated the infrastructure bill, there was one issue. There was not the workforce out there to do the infrastructure. And last week we all started to laugh because there was a big article about all the money that's going to be spent on chip manufacturing, building chip manufacturing facilities in the U.S. Columbus has got a proposal going, New York's got a proposal going, North Carolina's got a proposal going, Arizona has a proposal going, maybe all of those are built, maybe some of them are built. But you know what the article concluded with? We don't have the labor force in the U.S. to run these things. And so we were kind of amused by the fact that suddenly everybody was starting to come back to the point that we were arguing, many of us in DC, from the very beginning. This is great, but we don't have the labor force. We don't have a labor force in the U.S. for all of the manufacturing that people anticipate returning to the U.S. from offshore. We don't have it. Because there's a whole lot of reasons why we don't have it. And part of that, hopefully, is what you're here to talk about today. One of the things also that we hope you bear in mind is that in the transition from WIA to WIOA, if we think about the iteration of workforce development in the U.S., I go back to the 1850s. We did something in about 1862 called the Morrill Act, which established the nation's land-grant colleges and universities. And it was, in some ways, one of the first recognitions by the federal government that something was changing. And you know, many of us have farm backgrounds, and no offense, ladies, but the boys coming off of the farm, business was arguing, didn't understand how to be a part of the manufacturing and the industrial revolution that was occurring. Somebody had to train them. And so the response was to create the Morrill Act. As a Pitt alumni, I'm happy to recognize that the Pennsylvania Farmers High School was one of the first land grants. You all may know it as Penn State University. So there was a recognition that business needed to be a part of that. As you go through federal legislation, increasingly business not only became a part of that, when you get to WIOA, business is clearly a partner. Business is clearly a driver for how federal policy and federal implementation of workforce investment needs to occur. I think one of the people who's done a lot of work in economic development, and particularly regional economic development around the globe, is a guy by the name of Bruce Katz, who hangs out a lot at the Brookings Institute in DC. One of the things that Bruce recognizes that we do, and we argue a lot on Capitol Hill, and that is that a lot of this happens here in Tampa. It doesn't happen in Washington, D.C. It happens somewhat in the state capital, in state capitals, but it really happens here at the local level, on the ground, where you have to connect all of this. And the other thing I think to as we get into talking about the challenges, let's do that. One of the things that I think, we have a sign in our office that says, give me a minute to overthink that. Oh, it's resonating with a few, right? Yeah, big sign. It says, please wait a moment, let me overthink what you just said. think about your own experience today. Like, you got up this morning, which, you know, as far as we know, is a good thing, better than whatever else. But you got up somewhere, you lived somewhere, you got here somehow. How many of you have kids? Right? You had to deal with them this morning, right? Okay, so you dealt with them, and then you got on with your day. And that's part of what most people just assume in the course of their day. You're the workforce board, you can't make any assumptions in that process of the labor force in the Tampa region getting up and getting on with their day. Where do they live? Where do they work? What work do they do? How do they get there? What's the child care infrastructure that happens here in Tampa? What is quality child care? How much of that do you have? What is the cost of that? How are people navigating the fact that as employers, you need them to get to your place of employment? As the employer, how many of you ever really thought about all of that, right? Till you got here to the workforce board. Now it's part of your challenge is to go back and deconstruct how people get to work and what it is they do and where it is they do it, and start to think about, okay, how do we make this happen in Tampa? So there's a lot of systems. Workforce development is a system inside systems. So there's a lot of systems that have to be coordinated to make all of this happen. I sit on the Carl Perkins National Evaluation Panel. It's a lot of our conversations on the panel about how does career and tech education, how is that in the PK through 12 system aligning with what you all think are critical industries and critical skills in the region. We do a lot of work also in writing in to education legislation and to workforce legislation principles and concepts that are embedded in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that are embedded in Perkins. We want to see some of that in WIOA. So if you look at the 117th Congress's version of WIOA 2.0, you see a definition of work-based learning. Surprise, surprise, it's the same definition that's in Carl Perkins. Because we want that intentionality, that there are not separate paths, there are different ways to get to sustainability. So thinking about some of the issues and that are coming up, how many of you are experiencing employers' problems finding, quote, qualified employees? Anybody having a problem? Yeah, okay. So a hunt for labor becomes really, really interesting. I was hanging out, John gave me the opportunity last year to be with you all, and it was really something that struck me as some of the companies recognized that their recruitment, the pandemic allowed them to recognize their recruitment wasn't just in Tampa. They could find some of the back office they needed and some of the IT support they needed in places like Colorado. I'm going to start to do some work with the state of Vermont. And there's a lot of recognition in Vermont that a lot of people would like to live there. So how do they increase broadband? How do they increase some of the infrastructure necessary for people to work remotely? I do a lot of work with the Advanced Robotics and Manufacturing Institute and with Carnegie Mellon, looking at what is being automated, what's the speed of automation, what industries are we starting to see being automated. And then I do want to give a shout out to Senator Durbin from Illinois, who worked closely with us in the recognition that we already know what occupations are in the pathway of automation, what's most likely to be automated. Why are we waiting until those workers are dislocated to start to try and deal with them, to reskill them, or perhaps put them into skills in your company, in the same company, because they're good employees. So I think we have to continually watch, where is automation going, what is AI doing, and what is that impact gonna be? I get amused anymore when people talk about, skill shortages and all that, because the US labor market is dynamic. Your businesses are dynamic. So there's always a skills gap, right? There's always something that people could do better. National surveys tell us that about 52% of companies out there say that they have a substantial portion of their labor force that needs different skills than they have to be more productive. In the US labor market, the JOLTS report just came out, the job openings and labor turnover report. It's probably going to tell us, unless I'm way wrong, about 6.2 or 6+ million people were hired last month, and about 5.9 million people transitioned, whether that was retirement, whether that was they took another job, whatever, for whatever reason, there was a transition. That's over 100 million transactions a year in the US. That is incredibly dynamic. It means that there is this constant search, both for the talent that you as employers need, but also the employees are looking for different avenues. Maybe they want more hours, maybe it's more pay, maybe it's a different work environment, maybe it's a different industry altogether. There's constant dynamics, and it's one of the workforce boards. I think one of the critical roles for workforce boards is this examination of what's happening in your labor market, because your labor market is dynamic. I'm told that the complex that we're in is relatively new. So none of these jobs were here. None of this was a jobs location, and now it is. That's a huge dynamic that happens in terms of the community. Remote workers, and also we're finally, I think, almost a universal recognition around equity and access to employment. I know Michelle's going to talk later about quality jobs, and I think that's a huge discussion that faces you as a workforce board. What is a quality job? In the pandemic, we labeled some people essential workers. How many of you went to the grocery store during the pandemic? Was anybody there? Yes. Are they still there? How many of you got to the grocery store the last week? Still people working there? No. What's that? A lot of them. Or not enough of them, probably. So we said they were essential. What does that mean for you as a workforce board, for you as the Tampa region? What's their access to skill development? What's their access to quality child care? What's their access to affordable housing? What's your responsibility toward, quote, people that are in these essential jobs? Whether that is the grocery store, whether that are restaurants, whether that is healthcare. Again, it's something that, as I say, as pedestrians, as most of us are, we can go through our day and we don't have to make any thought about that. We don't have to make any assumptions. You're a workforce board. That's a piece of the labor force. That's part of what you need to have conversations about. What's our role? On the whole flip side, John mentioned it briefly. I got to video conferencing with the Silicon Valley Workforce Board, which is, I got to tell you, always kind of rock and roll when you get the tech companies together. But one of the things they were talking about is in the U.S. we've announced somewhere around 150,000 layoffs out of major technology corporations in the U.S. If you think about the Silicon Valley, those workers are the cachet of the Silicon Valley. What they know, how they produce software, what the imagination that they have, the creativity that they have. So the board is saying, holy cow, we better start talking about what are the economic opportunities for that workforce to retain them into the valley. Because if they start to go to Tampa, Florida, or Pittsburgh, PA, or New York, or we start to lose
piece of what we are in terms of the economic value and the economic assets in the region. And then they're also starting to say, wait a minute, this is a whole new set of talent that we've never seen before. These are skill levels that we're being asked to deal with and build on that we have never seen walk through the Career One stuff. So, and, those are things that, again, I think some people will talk about that. As a workforce board, you have to work through that. What are you doing for high-end talent? Is that part of your target? What's the value to the Tampa region? One of the things, as I said, I'm a Pittsburgh boy, and it was surprising, and now it's not so surprising. Alaska Airlines has 2 nonstops a day, Pittsburgh to Seattle, because of now technology and the symmetry of what is happening in Seattle and a much less expensive housing market and in some ways employment market in Pittsburgh. So we are watching these connections being made, and I know the Workforce Board in Pittsburgh has technology very high on their radar of working with it. This is what the legislation says your responsibility is as a workforce board. There are 16 activities in the legislation that it says you're responsible for. Some of the ones that I think are really important, and some I know you're going to hear later on about what you're doing with sector pathways. This is really critical because the law assigns to you the responsibility of working with education and with business in designing those pathways. Carl Perkins says they're going to focus on careers and credentials that matter to the workforce board. You're sending signals to education around what are the critical industries, what are the critical occupations, and what are the critical credentials in the Tampa region. So that work with you as businesses, you as industry sector leaders, also becomes incredibly critical. We're arguing in Washington, D.C., there's an organization that's identified about 700,000 credentials that are in use in the U.S. We're arguing that that is impossible to work with a list of 700,000. What is possible is to work with a list of industry credentials that you all, as the Tampa region, working with your industries, recognize are both recognized by the industry in your region, but also bring mobility to the worker. And we're arguing it's the point of hire that makes a determination about what credential matters, and that local workforce boards should have the freedom to find those credentials where you as business find those credentials. So your work with the industry sectors becomes important. All of this is pretty daunting. So we say think in 3 ways: compliance, operations, and strategy. Compliance, you're going to hear more about that today. What are your performance standards? What are the regulations that govern WIOA? And there's probably about 3,000 pages of federal regulation. I don't know how many pages Florida puts on there, but it's more than 10. Is it? So, you know, we're a highly regulated industry, so I think that also needs to be a recognition. Part of your role is to provide oversight to how are we as an organization handling that. Operations, part of what you're responsible for is to look at the continuous improvement and the effectiveness and efficiency of the system's operations. So it does require that you look at how are we spending, what does that look like, what's our internal processes look like. How many of you are familiar with the Baldrige criteria? Right? We're talking about the same sort of things that need to be applied. How do we deal with ourselves internally? What's our HR practices look like? How are we looking at terms of who are our customers? You're going to get these slides, so this is part of what we remind folks about compliance. How many of you have seen these? performance standards that govern the system. You know, we've got a few people. These are increasingly being applied. In 1988, workforce development in the U.S. was the first system that had performance measures, not just outcomes. Many of you are in healthcare, and you know you're going through the same sort of thing. It used to be how many hours or how many services did you offer. Now it's about how well are you leaving the individual. So it's about outcomes. We were the first in literally federal history to have performance outcomes applied. And now you're starting to see this being applied all over the board. What are outcomes? What are we achieving as a result of the investment in our work? Governance, this is just a quick illustration. We get asked a lot, what do boards across the country look like? Gives you a quick idea. We are seeing, every time we do this survey, every other year, we see an increasing number of boards become 501c3s. Because WIOA funding is flat, I will tell you and never repeat it, I will deny it. The 118th, it's going to be a tough slog to keep domestic funding levels at the level they are today. So I think this hunt for what is your work as a workforce board, and then how do you finance that, how do you achieve that, I think it's got to be one of the considerations for the board and for the staff. Let's talk about strategy. I am a big fan, and I like to collect some first edition books, and whenever I can find anything near a first edition of Through the Looking Glass, I buy it. And this is one of my favorite plates out of Lewis Carroll's book. When Alice is asking, like, which road do I take? And I think that's part of what you're here today is to figure out what road do we take. Because the question is, what's the target? You have to set that target. Are you looking at what are the critical industries? What are the critical skills? What neighborhoods do you want to work in? One of the things that we did was work very closely with the Federal Reserve. So any bankers in the room? Okay. So you get reinvestment credits, right? Community reinvestment credit.
We're credit union also.
Okay, all right. So banks get community reinvestment. What are they doing to reinvest in their neighborhoods? Guess what now counts as part of that community reinvestment? Workforce development. We work very closely with the Federal Reserve to get them to highlight the fact that if banks are making investments in neighborhood, not only can it be brick and mortar, it can also be workforce development. So now you have a way to go to the banking community and talk about how they leverage and they get more for their buck and how you get more for your buck in certain neighborhoods. What are the opportunity zones? And I think the question of, what worker, which worker, what industries? Paul Harrington, who's an economist out of Drexel University, Paul is always quick to point out that WIOA talks about universal service. And do you know what universal service means to the consumer? It means everybody gets crappy service. So the question is, who are you looking for? Who are the industries in your region that are really critical? What's their situation with finding workers? What's your system for trying to identify those workers and bring them out? We argue a lot in Washington about the funding levels for these pieces of funding that go into a region and to workforce development. And we can know the names. We know the names of all those fundings. We track about, $60, $70 billion worth of federal money aimed at workforce development in the U.S. We can name them, but only you know who has those assets in this region. What is their community presence? What are they doing in the community? What outcomes are they achieving? Do they understand what you understand about what are the workforce patterns in Tampa? What are those critical industries? When I was in Pittsburgh, I did a lot of work with Carnegie Mellon around what industries are emerging. John and I had a long conversation yesterday about where are investments being made in Tampa? What industries are they being made in? Outside of what economic development does, and local government invests $25 billion a year in economic development. Where is that investment being made? What impact does that have on the workforce? Where are private money? Where is private money being invested in the region? So those are the kind of things that you all have to consider. How the board is named. One of the things that sometimes the staff gets irritated with me when I'm working with a local board, because I say to the business people, here's the dirty secret. You know everything you need to know to walk into this door and to be a part of the strategy for the organization. How many of you have customers? How many of you thought about your customers 6 months ago? How many of you thought about your customers 3 months ago? How many of you thought about your customer this morning? Oh, that's the mentality that you bring to the workforce board. Who is our customer? How many of you have somebody that you think is a pain in the butt and you wish they weren't a customer? Right? Have you ever fired a customer? Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Right? Because you can't meet whatever demand that they place on you, right? Okay. That's the same thing. You have limited money in the organization. Who is the customer? What's happening in their world that's changing? It's dynamic. COVID changed everything about how we do business. So what's happening in their world? And then you get to ask John and Michelle, well, what are we doing as an organization to adapt to those changes? And then coming back to my friends in the quality world, because they taught me over and over, working with IBM and some other companies, that what gets measured gets done. So how are you measuring the changes that you're making to adapt to the changing environment for businesses and workers in Tampa? They're not in those performance measures. I will tell you that. They're not there. But you know how to ask these questions. Who's the customer? What's happening to them? How are we adapting? And then many of you in business also understand that if you're not tracking, then how do you know the changes you made are having a positive impact on your bottom line, positive impact in your manufacturing or service processes? So the ability to explain how we achieve is also important. So you don't have to understand. There's a thing called Carl Perkins. You don't have to understand the regulations for Carl Perkins. That's what he gets paid for. That's what Michelle gets paid for. That's what the staff gets paid for. You don't have to understand. You don't have to know what adult basic education is. How much is it? Where does it go? You have to keep your eye here on these really critical questions, because that's the expertise. That's part of the expertise that you bring to the board. Whatever the new normal, if there is such a thing, we're watching a lot more work-based learning happen across the system, which is a good thing. Don't tell the Department of Labor that I told you apprenticeship isn't the beginning and end of everything. They get mad at me. We're paid to provide technical assistance to all kinds of apprenticeship projects, and it's really good stuff. We firmly believe in apprenticeship. But it's not the only pathway around work-based learning. Make all kinds of learning happen. We're doing a lot of work on something called the electronic learning record, called the LER. How do we hold our credentials? How many of you graduated from college? If you want your transcript, what do? Call the phone. Yeah, you got to call them and then pay them a few shekels. What we're saying is, well, wait a minute. I own that. I own that credential. Why don't I have access to that? Why don't I have access to other pieces? How many of you learned something at work that you don't have a degree or a certificate in? Right? Excel, PowerPoint, whatever. So the electronic learning record is meant to hold the skills that we as individuals have. So we're doing a lot of work there. We're doing work with our European colleagues on how do we recognize what we've learned at work and the expertise that we have as a result of what we've learned on the job. How do we hold that? How do we recognize that? How do we do it in a way that if I'm here in Florida and I decide I'm going to move to Iowa, that the folks in Iowa understand what skill I have and I've acquired in my work life in Tampa. So I think these are coming up. We're watching some really incredible things around work with employers. In Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut, the workforce boards, we're working with Electric Boat, which builds our nation's submarines. The legislature in Connecticut last year just awarded $30 million to the workforce boards across Connecticut to take what they had learned with Electric Boat and to establish manufacturing academies across the state. Because Electric Boat will tell you the workforce boards are integral to our strategy about how to recruit, retain, and skill our labor force. They will tell you the same thing in Hampton Roads with the shipbuilding industry. They'll tell you the same thing, Spirit Aerosystems, which builds many of the nation's airplanes. Spirit Aerosystem will tell you the same thing about the Workforce Board, Wichita State University, and the Career and Tech Center at Wichita. They are all integral to how Spirit Aerosystems recruits, retains, and skills the labor force necessary to do what they do. Airbus will tell you that about what they do in outside of Mobile, Alabama. The board is critical to how all of that works. So that's part of the relationship that you can develop. Things that we looked at in WIOA, and we're going to continue to argue at the federal level. I think one of the challenges we have is that we have no lifelong learning system in the U.S. There is no connection between different pieces of how we do skill development, and I really think we got to figure that out. And boards are essential to do that. You see thousands of people at the Career Center. How do you convert that into what are the skills? What's the skill bank you have in Tampa? How do you raise that skill bank? How do you work with the PK through 12, the post-secondary system, in order to create that opportunity for everybody in the region to advance their skills? So I think there's huge challenges. I'm going to stop. To make sure that you guys stay on time, which is pretty remarkable for me. John will share with his colleagues, holy God, you can't believe he was on time. I want to give you the opportunity, if there are questions you have, I want to be able to try and at least obfuscate the answer. Because I'm from Washington, right? Who would expect a direct answer?
One of the key challenges is getting at the what we typically call the U6 worker, understanding who they are, marketing to them, and particularly at a place like Tampa Bay, and I'm with the small business sector, we need those workers. We need to figure out who they are. We need to figure out how maybe there's some reskilling, but I think people generally think they know how to work. They have the attitude for work. A lot of them have the financial need to work, but we can't seem to get data around who they are, and we also need to figure out ways to market to them to figure out how to get businesses to attract them. That's really what we need.
Right.
Is there some best practice out there somewhere that we could tap into? Because we don't seem to have answers for that at the local level.
That's interesting. I know Connexus, one of our boards in Michigan, Todd has a whole group of small businesses that work with them to look at what are the credentials, what are the skills that those small businesses are utilized, and then the board helps them translate that into credentials. What are you looking for? And then start to work out how do we do the recruitment. We are pushing the Department of Labor to give better guidance around the notion of what is marketing versus outreach. We argue that when you have a business or a group of businesses that are looking for a set of workers, if the board
quote markets to try and attract that segment into the American Job Center. That is not marketing. Marketing is if you want to put out a billboard about how wonderful the workforce board is, with no intent of anything other than promoting what it is you all do as the board. But if you're looking for skills, or you're looking for a foundation set of skills that then you can either upskill or you can begin to put into businesses, we're arguing that's not marketing, that's outreach. Because you're identifying critical industries, you're identifying critical skills that are necessary in the region. Why don't you have the ability to go out there and try and attract those critical skills to fill in where you need them? So
My opinion on it is that it's probably the biggest impact this board can have is to figure out who those workers are and somehow make them more visible in the marketplace.
Yeah, I know John and Michelle have access to something called U6 data, which is one of my favorite databases. Because it really does start to identify who is tangentially attached to the labor market, who is working part-time because they can't find full-time opportunity. So I think you've got to mine the U6.
Well, I think that's part of the problem is when we asked before to see what that data looks like and try to get it down,
Yeah.
it gets harder and harder to get.
It gets really, really harder and harder to get. I think the
It's not
other
at a
data that we're
local
looking
level
at.
to mine at a local level. One of the things
Yeah,
that we're
it
doing
is.
now is, I don't know if you're familiar with the project, GoDaddy has their Venture Forward project, and really what that does, it looks at web page creation since the pandemic. So they make some assumptions out of that, however many millions of people have created new web pages, either as a side gig, side hustle, or as a primary source of income. So you could make a regional inference from that. These are the folks that may be part of that U6 demographic because they are creating a side gig or a side hustle through whatever they're doing on their web page. We're working with them right now to figure out how can we get that data specifically. How does that translate?
Yeah.
And can we even get, will they even allow us to get it for, there was 30-some-odd-thousand new web pages created just in Hillsborough County. Between 2020 and 2022. So wouldn't that be great data to get it and speak a little bit, Mike, to it's a reasonable inference that might be the population from a U6 perspective that we would actually be able to get our hands on, other than just some number from a big data set that is hard to break down.
Yeah, and I know you do it here. I think one of the good practices of boards across the country to triangulate data because it is so hard to get the data that we need. So I think looking at things, multiple sets of data gives you a better ability to make certain assumptions. But again, I think also at the local level, you know what neighborhood, working with the PK through 12 system, you probably know neighborhoods where you have problems with attendance, you have problems with students who are maybe not looking like they're going to make it through 12th grade. I think those are the things that you got to put together. The databases are really, really great.
So I didn't write it down. Where's the best practice on this in terms of?
Connexus with Todd up in Michigan. It's a pretty cool project. I think I don't know how it made it through the pandemic, but that's something that John can check in with Todd. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ron. Thank you for sharing with us. I'm wondering if in the integral role of the board, why we didn't touch on collaboration as an important part of board responsibility.
Yeah, why not have it maybe part of the 16, but yeah, I mean, as I said, workforce development or workforce, what you do is a system inside other systems.
Right.
It is essential that you be that convening point. I think it does say in there convening and leveraging. It's really important for you to bring that together because you are the ones that should have that overarching view of the labor force and what is happening in the county about where, in the region, about where business is moving to, working with economic development, where are the investments being made, what does that mean in terms of work patterns, and then where is everything else. was doing a panel with businesses in Delaware, in one of the, and I'm really proud of it. I must admit, my mother is gone now, so I can finally admit that I graduated somewhat from barely. And one of the things that I barely got through was economics, but I remembered something about economics, about the inelasticity of wages. So we were working, and there was a business there that was very much retail consumer focused, and saying, look, if I try to take care of my workers and I raise my prices, at some point in time I become uncompetitive to the consumer. They're going to make other choices. I can increase my wages to an extent. I can do certain things around my benefits, but there are certain things I cannot do as a single employer. I cannot solve the problem of affordable housing. I cannot solve the problem of quality childcare. I cannot by myself solve the problem of a transportation network. So they were saying to the State Workforce Board, you have the ability to convene those players. I can tell you what the needs are. You have the ability to convene, and I think that's, to your point, we should highlight that number. It is key and core to what is the Workforce Board you need to do. You have all kinds of people on the board who sit on other organizations, who touch other organizations that are part of this whole fabric of where we live, where we work, and how we maneuver between the two. So yeah, it is really, really critical. It's one of the things that is frustrating about WIOA is that in DC, there is this understanding that federal money needs to be graded at the local level. And there is this sort of offhand recognition that that's the board that has to figure that out. But there's not then the attendant, well then how do we measure how effectively the board does that? Again, what gets measured gets done. There's no measure for the effectiveness of the board in trying to align all of this federal money that comes into the region, but it's absolutely critical for everything to actually work, for the market to work.
No, that's good. I think these points are mutually inclusive as we talk about economic development, workforce development, an integral part of that. And we talk about solutions to affordable housing or transportation. Again, there's that seamless tie of how workforce development can be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, anybody here in economic development? I get to hang out with those folks, and you know, there's a lot of rethinking going on around economic development. Many places built these really nice business parks outside of the central city, and they're lovely. They really are lovely. Provide a lot of employment. We work with the landscapers. It provides a lot of work for landscapers. But nobody thought about now in many ways the population we need is in the urban core. We didn't build affordable housing. We didn't build the transportation network to get them connected to these opportunities. And again, I think you're in the position to do that. How does that work here?
So, you said something that you said, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, right? So WIOA, it was very focused on being business driven. But how many measures account for,
One, the Department of Labor is proposing the business measure. We've had a lot of argument with regard to what that measure should be around how effectively you serve businesses. And I honestly think there's not been enough focus on business services versus client services. And I think there needs to be more focus on what business services we are, as a system, we are providing. And again, I think some of the great examples are, the folks in Eastern Connecticut, Hampton Roads, what Keith is doing out in Wichita. How many of you have ever had a cell phone repaired? Right? Real likelihood that repair was facilitated through Dallas, Texas. you see the Workforce Board in Dallas, Texas, working with not only the avionics industry, but also the logistics industry to make certain that that cell phone gets to you as rapidly as possible. That's an industry partnership, Mike, that now pays for the marketing. There is a game that you can go on your cell phone in Dallas, Texas, that shows you the avionics industry, highlights to young people how the avionics industry works. Along the way, it helps them understand how critical avionics is to the Dallas-Fort Worth region, so that they build up points as they're going through the game. All of that is not paid by industry. As part of that, the three boards that are in that area, North Texas, Dallas, and then, what's Judy McDonald's County? Tarrant County, Texas, does a really solid industry partnership among the three boards, and that partnership now directs a lot of marketing efforts towards, which supports both the work of the board, but also economic development, because they continually market how critical avionics and logistics are to Dallas-Fort Worth. So young people see that, hear that when they're in the PK through 12 system. One of the other things we argue, we're trying to work on it now. I was just over in some of the Senate staffers the other day. PK through 12 has Title I, and there are certain markers that allow an entire school to be Title I. And we're suggesting that rather than you going into the PK through 12 system and saying, okay, the three of you are economically disadvantaged, so we're going to deal with you. The two of you over here are economically disadvantaged, and the rest of you, like, go have at it. And we're saying that's crazy, because it's just reinforcing, behaviors that we don't want to do. We want to do more inclusive behaviors. We know that C student probably struggles as much about what his or her career goals are as, low students or high students. So we're saying, isn't there a trigger that would allow a workforce board to work with an entire school, the administration, the teachers, guidance counselors, around what is happening in the labor market in the region to better do teacher and workplace exchanges in the summer or wherever. So we're going to keep working with our PK through 12 colleagues to say, isn't there a trigger point where we can work with the whole school in seeing that career information that we understand gets into the schools? Other questions, or Doug, am I giving you some time back?
We're good. Good. So,
All right, I'm gonna hang out the rest of the day. So if you're shy and you don't want to ask a question publicly, you can grab me, and I'll be happy to try and answer.
One more question. What's the likelihood that anything gets done in this congressional session as it relates to rearmament?
Oh, I think there's lots of things that are going to get done. They're going to call the Congress to order. They're going to adjourn on Thursdays and go home. Wow.
a loaded question.
Yeah, that's really a loaded question. I think it's a huge challenge. I think 118th is going to be a big, big challenge. Part of what we heard in the conversation around the election for the speaker was around what are called the top line numbers for the 12 appropriations bills that fund the federal government. I think it's been 20 years since the federal government's had a budget. The top line numbers are going to be a challenge. I do think there's general consensus among the economists that I hang out with, certainly, is the fear of the balanced budget, not because you would balance a budget, but putting that into legislation. Part of the role of the federal government, when we head into recessions, as happened in 08, 09,
is to spur the economy, and you do that by the government spending. And so I think there's some fear there. I think for us, WIOA is funded about, let's be generous, about $10 billion a year. We have done work with Representative DeLauro. We've looked at international expenditures and percentages of the GDP and looked at what others are doing. India has a game plan to increase basic skills of 200 million Indians. 200 million. I think it's crazy the arrogance that we have when we look at India and China, which have more than 1 billion people each, to think somehow there is not the next Jonas Salk, there is not the next Dr. Starzl, there is not the next Bill Gates or Stephen Jobs among those billion. Our guess is that to get the U.S. to a competitive skill level again is an $80 billion issue over the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't know where that's coming from. You know, but I think what you do, your 501c3, I think this notion of how do you align and attract, part of that has to do with what you're doing today, the strategy. What is the compelling strategy to, you know, to the city, to the county, to the state, to businesses that are here? I think that's part of it. Cool. Thank you for letting me join you today. You all, you know, I hope that I gave you something to think about, but you don't understand how critical me being allowed to hang out with you today is, because as you may have worked in Washington, D.C., we tend to think a lot of ourselves. We tend to speak a lot to ourselves. So hearing your conversations really is important for me. It's a good perspective for me to take back. So again, thanks, John, for the opportunity to be here, and have a great rest of the day.
Ron Painter, I could listen to him all day, and we have the opportunity at the National Workforce Board conference in Washington, D.C. to do just that. So if any of the board members have a dying urge to go there, just, you know, let John know, and we'll see what we can do. Every year we bring a couple board members with us, so they can.
I think Julie and Ben
are going this
We're
year.
going to try Ben again. If he doesn't make it, he's back on the floor.
So we'll take it off the list. But thank you again, Ron. And you're staying here, or are you leaving this morning?
No, I'm gonna hang out with you all for a while.
So if you have a question for Ron during lunch, you know, he'd be happy to talk to you and twist your ear. I do want to have all the board, not just the leadership team for CareerSource Tampa Bay, if you could please just stand up, or support members, just so the board members can recognize you, see that you're here. Just stand up for a second. So if you've got a question from the board, we're here to support you. Don't hesitate to come up to us, ask us a question. If we don't know the answer, we'll find out someone who can get the answer for you. Thank you. A couple of people already asked me for the PowerPoint for today. I have it all put together in one. I'll send out a version of that so that you have that next week. And then the other thing is the Wi-Fi. Just in case you didn't see, there's a note on the paper. It's capital A, L-O-F-T, ALOF. I stayed at ALOF for the first time in Orlando, and I felt I was hip, you know, staying in the newest type of hotel there is. So it's kind of neat to actually be here on the cutting edge. We're right on time, so, you know, that's hard to do. You run these types of events. So we'll go right to the next speaker. He's a member of the leadership team here at CareerSource Tampa Bay, Chad Kunra, Vice President of MIS Data Services. We probably should have given him half a day as opposed to 5 minutes. So good luck with that.
By the schedule, he's got one.
Yeah, I got one. Good morning, everyone.
You got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. We're going to cover the performance measures. federal performance measures we have here at First Source and Pay. So the federal performance measures, and this year, they're also a REACH metric. So it's 20% of our grading board for REACH. So really, really critically important that we perform well on those primary performance. For the goal, we have to meet 9% of the goal. We negotiate yearly with PEO. This year, we really probably the best negotiations we've had with PEO. Our goals are, use the mic. Sorry, buddy.
A little more soft-spoken.
Sorry. Okay. So we negotiated goals and just really did we have probably the most achievable goals we've had since I've been here, which is about 5 years. So we're going to cover that in a little bit. There's 5 measures that are focused on employment, credentials, and wages. For employment, we're looking at the second and fourth quarter after exit. So 90 days go by, no services, they exit, right? And then 2 quarters after that, we look at whether they're employed. And then another 6 months, we look at their employment. So it accounts for all of the programs that are under primary indicators of performance. It's adult, dislocated worker, youth, and Wagner Kaiser, which for those of you that don't know, Wagner Kaiser is our general fund that there's no real criteria, right? So anybody that comes to our offices is Wagner Kaiser. They range from, the goals range from 64% for Wagner Kaiser to 82.9% for dislocated worker. For wages, it's just the second quarter after exit. We're looking at the quarterly wages, second quarter after exit. Goals for all the programs, and those range from 4,708 to 10,125 for dislocated workers. Credentials. So this is just WLO. It's the percent of customers enrolled in education or training to obtain a credential within 1 year after exit. And those goals range from 50% to 70% for dislocated workers. 50% for you. MSG, so this is education and training, so it's WLO, and essentially you're looking at for each year, program year that they're enrolled in training, they have to receive a measurable skills gain, so progress reports, transcripts, post-secondary, those sorts of progress goals. This is just for WLO. And the goals range from 27.8 for youth to 77.4 for dislocated workers. And hopefully you guys can all see this, but this is our Q1 performance for this year. So we're meeting or exceeding all of our goals but 3. So what are the 3? You've got the measurable skills gain for adult. We're at 86.75%, so pretty close to meeting the goal there. The next one is for youth, right? We're at employment, second quarter after exit. We're at 87.03, very close to meeting that goal as well. And credential attainment for youth, we're at 71.4, so a lot of work to be done there. Those are the 3 that we're not meeting. So the rest of them we're meeting. We're in really good shape for a lot of these metrics. And like I said, we negotiated, so it's never been more achievable than it is now.
So Chad, can you kind of talk a little about one of the things that, and to kind of put this into context, as it relates to a letter grade from the state, from the REACH Act. Talk about how this kind of coincides with the measure, or is it our bonus measure, that percentage of people that we work with that are on TANF or on some type of sustainable benefit. So I just wanted to kind of close the loop in regards to, we're meeting these measures and you really are working with the most, with the people with the most barriers to serve. We do it more so than almost anybody else in the state as a region. So that's something that I take a lot of pride in, because we are meeting the definition of who we're supposed to be serving in the wheel. I just wanted to kind of tie that.
Yep, Dan's going to cover REACH a little bit, but part of REACH is there's a bonus metric for serving the hardest to serve, right? So on welfare transition or SNAP, right? We did really, really well on that. So not only are we performing well on the prior year's performance, but we're doing it serving the hardest to serve. So we just like John, thank you.
When you mean serving, you mean the effort or the implementation?
The effort of implementation. So
But I can make an effort to, let's just use the example, just to tell you what you're talking about, an outreach and marketing. There's a difference between outreach and business development. As a business owner, I can put out an RFP, I can put out a bid for something and reach out 1,000 companies, but I really hire one. That's really the contract, the business development, the implementation. So are you basing this on outreach? Are you basing this on effort? Or are you basing this numbers on actual implemented numbers? Do you see 50 youth and
It's actual implementation.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions?
Yeah, bear in mind, one of the hallmarks of WIOA is absolutely everybody who touches the system has to be accounted for. So when you see like the Wagner Pfizer numbers, you see these numbers, it is anybody who is enrolled has to be accounted for.
That's what the difference,
Yeah.
there's a difference between enrollment and an effort to get people enrolled.
Correct. But this is all based on
Enrollment.
Right.
So, and tying another number, Ron, you said something that was kind of scary, actually. 52% of employers talk about their labor force needing to reskill. You know, that if you think about that, just put that from a labor force perspective in Tampa, what was that, it's 800,000 give or take in Hillsborough County? So are we talking about 400,000 plus employees that are employed by the business community need some type of reskilling and retooling? That's a daunting number considering we serve, what, 20,000 a year? When you think about, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about resources and the need to have different and diverse resources to be able to make a dent in that.
And we've also implemented strategies to get to some of these numbers, and we're early on in 22, 23 performance numbers, so we have until June 30th to actually see the results a little bit better, right? 100%. And you know, I will say from a strategy standpoint, we did make some decisions in how individuals are making their way through our centers and how we're capturing their data and also assisting them to achieve some of these numbers for the letter grade. It was intentional to make sure that we were casting a wider net to support them.
All right. Moving right along to our next speaker. He's a Senior Vice President, Business and Workforce Strategies at CareerSource Florida, Tallahassee. He's a passionate leader committed to helping organizations and individuals make positive, transformative change through strengths-based leadership. Prior to that, Dan, I just have to mention that you work with Dynamic Workforce Solutions, and that's where we came to know you as well. You oversaw the service provider contracts for CareerSource Capital Region and CareerSource North Florida Central Region, as well as CareerSource Tampa Bay's one-stop operator. So we know him very well. He's responsible for initiating and developing and maintaining the CareerSource Florida strategic policy, oversight of strategy development and deployment, and oversight of key statewide strategic performance initiatives. And we're very happy to welcome Dan McGrew, Senior Vice President at CareerSource Florida.
I'm going to go without the mic because I think I can project a bit. A little bit more about me, and for you Jets fans who were alienated earlier in Miami Boy. So thank you for having an offense slightly more inept than the Miami Boy. Thank you for giving us the right to lose to the Bills next week. We really appreciate that. But I am excited, very excited to be here, and really the topic of discussion we're going to talk about today is the REACH Act. But before we get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land of who the State Workforce Development Board is. So the State Workforce Development Board is our governor's principal policy and investment board for the state of Florida. 36 members that's headed up by the governor. But the other 35 members are comprised of House and state representatives, local elected officials, agency representatives, including vocational rehabilitation, Division of Blind Services, Department of Economic Opportunity, Department of Education, and then the majority, 50%, are business, right? And our business representation on our state board includes kind of the economic industry landscape of the state of Florida. So we have labor representatives, we have healthcare, IT, aviation, aerospace, manufacturing, right? So it looks very similar to what's happening at the local level. And our charge is also the same, right? Directly guide the workforce efforts of the state, right? And very, very similar to the local workforce development board, I always like to chunk kind of how does that directing and guidance happen, right? And there's really three big levers that can be pulled, and we pull these levers all the time as well. So one is a policy lever, right? So what are the state strategic policies? What are the strategies of the state? Where do we want to see monies or efforts invested, right? So you have a policy arm or policy lever that you can pull. And we also have a planning lever. So the state WIOA Unified Plan, which brings in partnerships from education, adult education, our career and technical education partners, Department of Children and Families. We bring all that together at the state level, and much like you do at the local level, take that and build your local plans, right? So you kind of have that lever as to what's going to happen on the ground. And then the third lever is funding, right? So you heard a little bit about that today. How are you bringing in discretionary dollars? But we have somewhat discretionary dollars at the state level, but in the form of the governor's set aside. So 15% of the state's WIOA allocation is directed by our state workforce board. This region, I think last year, with dollars that were invested for veterans, received a chunk of that, and you're continuing to work through that program now. So just to give you an idea, it's not very dissimilar, right, at the state level to what's happening here. But what we're going to talk about today is the REACH Act, right? So, and the implementation update as it pertains to CareerSource Florida and our efforts. So the REACH Act, REACH stands for Reimagining Education and Career Health. Okay, so I'd like to focus in on a couple of words in there. First, reimagining, right? Really what the House and Senate were saying in their unanimous vote that was passed in 2021 was, we need to do this a little differently. Florida has changed, right, economically, population-wise, et cetera, and in the last number of years. We need to reimagine this. And we need to bring education and career kind of the workforce together. Workforce is one of those loaded terms that, depending upon who you're speaking with, can mean very different things. If you talk to somebody in the federal workforce system in this room, you say workforce, and you think, oh, WIOA, right? It's about second quarter after exit, fourth quarter after your kind of mind goes in a different place. You talk to economic developers, workforce is talent, right? When you talk to education, workforce is what are the programs we have that are preparing people for giving them skills, right? So workforce is one of those terms where we can all have a meeting and talk about workforce and all agree and walk out of the room and have, three different ideas of what was agreed upon, okay? So when you think about reimagining education and career health, it's about bringing that together. But this was unanimously passed on both the House and the Senate and signed into law by Governor DeSantis June 24th, 2021. So this is an important piece of legislation. So Ron asked earlier how many pages, did we add on to WIOA? It was a 118-page piece of legislation that covered not only the federal workforce system for the state, but also education was included in that. Our public assistance programs were included in that. There's a lot going on. And really for the last 18 months, we've been in the throes of implementation. So anytime I talk about the REACH Act, I start with the very first line of the legislation, right? One very long sentence. But the REACH Act, addresses the evolving needs of Florida's economy by increasing the level of collaboration, cooperation among state businesses and education communities, while improving training within and equity and access to a more integrated workforce and education system for all Floridians. This is not unlike what you heard the purpose of WIOA is. It's not unlike a lot of the themes that you heard Ron talking about in the last 45 minutes, right? Bringing the business community, the education community, the workforce community together, right, to provide access, equity to all Floridians to really, at the end of the day, kind of grow our state. But there's three kind of pillars, I'd say, within the REACH Act that you can, I want you to hear these themes throughout the initiatives we talk about, but one is access. So getting more access to the system, right? So if you're a job seeker or a business, how can I gain access to these benefits? For the years that I worked at the local workforce development board, we were always the best kept secret, right? You meet people like, oh my gosh, you do this? How long have you been doing this? Well, a long time, right? We've been doing this a long time. We've been in this community for a long time, right? But how do we get more access to the system? The second is alignment, right? And alignment is across a lot of different kind of, I guess, verticals, if you want to think about that. But alignment among business and education communities and the workforce communities, alignment among state agency partners, Department of Economic Opportunity, Department of Education, Department of Children and Families, Enterprise Florida, Career Source Florida, etc. And then accountability, like what are we here to do? What outcomes are we providing, are we creating, and how can we make that more palatable and understandable to the outside world? So I'll start with very kind of access and alignment initiative, which is the Credentials Review Committee. One of the single biggest changes, right, that the REACH Act put into place is the establishment of the Credentials Review Committee. And Career Source Florida, our state board of directors, was charged with appointing this Credentials Review Committee. 18 members, to include the chancellors of the education system, private education system itself, industry representatives, businesses, and local workforce development board, both urban and rural representation on this board. And the charge for this committee is to create or develop for the state of Florida a master credentials list. So what determines what makes it to the master credentials list? Well, this past December, after 15 months of work, the committee approved a state definition for credentials of value. So these are the criteria that determine a credential of value. It needs to meet employer demand. It needs to meet a certain wage threshold, or the occupation that this credential leads to needs to meet a certain wage threshold. And if it doesn't meet a wage threshold, does it stack or can it sequence to a credential that does lead to an occupation that meets that wage threshold? Okay. These are the criteria that the Credentials Review Committee has established. Really what this does, so that criteria is set. So now, since December, what we've been doing is evaluating every credential offer that we've been able to collect in the state of Florida, okay, through the public education system, the private education system, apprenticeships, licenses, industry certifications, etc., and we're evaluating it against this rubric, or against this definition. And in February 9th, the first set of credentials that have passed that criteria will be added to the Master Credentials List. That Master Credentials List will be updated on a quarterly basis, and annually, when new labor market data is available, reevaluated and recreated. So it's setting the foundation for a Master Credentials List for the state of Florida that responds dynamically to the labor market needs of the state of Florida. Also built into this is our mechanisms for local demand. So you talk about local flexibility. How do you know, I have a new employer moving to town, changing the landscape, FinTech in Tampa, right? Changing the landscape of what's needed, right? How do I get that on the Master Credentials List? It's not there yet. We've built a mechanism where that can be added, okay? Prove out local demand, get it on the list. Now, why is this important? Why do we care that we have a Master Credentials List? Well, the purpose of the Master Credentials List is to direct federal and state funding toward credentials. So there are education dollars that are pointed to things that have to be on the Master Credentials List. Our WIOA dollars, right, for training need to be pointed to credentials on the Master Credentials List. And those of you who have been in workforce for a while, this is not unlike anything we've done in the federal workforce system for a while, like always. We're only going to pay for a credential or pay for a certification that leads to a job that pays a certain amount of money. That's all. We're only going to do that. To do that for the state across education is a different, right? That's very different. So this is very exciting work that's happening. Again, talking about alignment, right? And providing access and visibility and transparency. The next big one that we are working on is the alignment of workforce boards. So currently there are 24 local workforce development boards in the state of Florida. The law very specifically and directly asks for a reduction in the number of local workforce development boards for the state of Florida, with these three goals in mind. Eliminate layers of administrative entities to improve coordination of the workforce development system, establish consistent eligibility standards across the state, provide greater flexibility in the allocation of resources to ensure that most of that goes to the job seeker and business services that are happening. So that is language directly from the law. That is what we are charged to do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does less lead to more personalization and more development?
With which one? Oh, fewer. Okay, so that's a good question. So let me walk through kind of the process of where we are, right? So what that prompted, or what that initiated, was first, we started phase one back in March of last year, which concluded around June. Kind of what's the lay of the land? Let's get an idea of kind of what is the workforce system in the state of Florida. EY did that. Entered into contract with EY in September to complete phase two. Phase two was a lot more data research, so looking at commuting patterns, where are the labor shifts, where are the economic development areas, right? Where are the services, right? WIOA has very specific criteria for what has to be included in a local workforce development area, so completing all of that. They conducted, I think at this point, 112 total interviews or meetings, meeting with over 650 folks throughout the state. With those of you who were here in November, I think it was, we had a group stakeholder engagement. I was here for that. Just what is it that you all need, right? They're compiling all of that, and in our February board meeting is the target for the completion of phase two, where they will, EY can present the results of that and where they think. So to your question, how does it doesn't change the local flavor, it changes the area where you have the local influence. There are areas throughout the state where workers are fluid, businesses are fluid across borders, right? And how do you designate those areas so that you can provide the most targeted and aligned services to that general area? That's the goal.
Dan, would it be fair to say that they're looking at realigning economies of scale? Is that another way of saying what you're saying?
I think there's no way to get around that first point, right? So the economies of scale, how can you do more, right? Do more with the dollars that you have. They're fixed, they decrease, right? How can you do more with the dollars? Can you get questions?
What role will the local elected official play in the process?
Okay. So the local elected official is the kind of head, if you will, in many ways, of the local workforce development area. So it's a big one, right? So getting on board, coming together, saying, yeah, this is the area. This is the area where we're going to operate. This is going to be our local workforce development area, and this is where the dollars are going to flow, right, to this geographical county area. And those local elected officials in that area need to be in agreement on that. So when you have a single county area like Hillsborough, you only have to do that, but we have multiple county areas where there are consortiums, right? And the local elected officials, or each county chooses, has a consortium and chooses one representative of that board to be the authority for that. But it requires collaboration, it requires agreement, it requires that buy-in. We have to have that.
So to be clear, Hillsborough is different because it's a single area?
Hillsborough is a single county local workforce development area. There's a couple of those throughout the state, Miami-Dade, Broward, West Palm, right? Brevard. The majority are multi-county areas, 3 to 7.
So by inference, are you saying they probably have changed first? Those 5 or 6?
I don't know, right? The results of what EY is compiling from commuting patterns, industry, what's in the area, what services are in the area, I don't know. There's not a priority scheme of local change first or not. It's about creating a local workforce development area that meets the requirements of WIOA, right? That also represents the evolution of our state, right, where we are today. So this is where we are right now, very close to seeing options or where we're going to go. If you had to pin me to something, I think what you're going to see is the State Workforce Development Board exercising those 3 levers, right? Policy, funding, planning, right, to accomplish this, right? I think that's what you're going to see here. which is what we have. To give you an idea of the stakeholder engagement that's happened thus far, like I said, over 100, I think it's 112 meetings, over 600 people, 600 individuals, either individually interviewed or in group interviews or live interviews, virtual, etc. A lot's been done. And the last, kind of piggybacking a little bit on what Chad was talking about from a performance perspective, really getting into the accountability side. The other thing that Career Source Board was charged with doing was assigning a letter grade to each local workforce development board. By law, that has to relate to the 14 measures that Chad just kind of showed, which are the federal performance accountability measures. And also by law, the majority of that grade must be based on the improvement in the long-term self-sufficiency of participants through outcome measures such as reduction in long-term public assistance and higher wages. Law, grants, those are long reads, hard reads, but I think they're very clear communication of what the state wants, right? Or whatever, or the grantee, or whomever that is, what they want. So what is the state asking for here? We want to work on self-sufficiency, economic mobility. That needs to be a large percentage of the grade. Also saying your federal performance measures also need to be included as well. John?
So Dan, are the two mutually exclusive, or are they going to look at their Southern grades as it relates to alignment of goals?
So no. There are two independent things, and the letter grades, as well, I mean, we kind of run into this. So what have we done, right? So what happened? So the REACH office, so also established in the REACH Act with a new office in the Executive Office of the Governor, the REACH office, their charge was to develop the methodology for the letter grades. Career Source Florida's charge was to use that methodology and assign those letter grades out. So much like you wouldn't want to receive a report card without knowing you were ever in class, okay? We didn't really issue letter grades, right? Said, hey, based on this methodology, here's what last year might have looked like, okay? That's kind of what happened there. But where we are now is using these categories: employment services, training services, business services, and economic self-sufficiency. I think later this week, Don was asking in chat, so later this week, I think the Q1 numbers will be out, right? So you get a real good sense of, hey, for this year, where you're going to be assigned a letter grade, how did we do Q1? It's a little bit of a lag in the numbers that are coming, and please respect, it's all new. Department of Economic Opportunity are working very hard to get this on a predictable schedule so you know when to expect them on a quarterly basis. But the 7 measures that are there and an extra credit, number 1, participants with increased earnings. So going to that self-sufficiency, how many people had increased earnings after working with the local workforce development board versus before, okay?
And that's all titles within your report, right? It's not just WIOA, it's Wagner, Pizer, WIOA.
That one is, yeah, WIOA, Wagner, Pizer, yeah.
Okay.
Reduction in public assistance. How many individuals that you served that were on public assistance programs, SNAP and TANF, right? A year later, were no longer on those programs. Makes sense.
That's a high bar.
It is.
It's a high bar, and how does that connect to other resources?
Well, the goal isn't 100%. So remember that. The goal isn't 100%. So it's what percent did you get, okay? And I imagine those goals year over year will change as the system improves and in the spirit of continuous improvement. But they're all related to your question, right? So employment and training outcomes, those measures that Chad just threw up on the screen, what percent of all of those measures did you meet? So 3 of 14, or 11 of 14 right now, so somewhere 80-something, 86%, forgive my math if I get that wrong, but somewhere in that realm is your employment and training outcomes. So what percent of your federal measures are being met? Participants in work-related training. So how many of the folks that you're serving are you working to build skills? So are they enrolled in CTE programs? Are they enrolled in adult ed? Are they enrolled in work-based learning models, apprenticeship? What are you doing with the population you're serving? What percent of them are in some work-related training program? Okay. So when you think about, again, access, alignment, what are we here to do? Your 2 business measures, continued repeat business, year-over-year business measures. So these are 2 additional measures that the Department of Labor put out a number of years ago. The state of Florida has been tracking them for a long time, so we included those 2. Completion to funding ratio. So from your federal investment, the dollars that are coming to this local workforce board, how many people are actually being served and completed through the system. So one of the things I love always hearing about Tampa Bay, we hear about 14.5 million coming through CARES Act, right? That's not federal dollars, but every completion that comes out of that program, if tracked in the system right, leads that. So that's a stronger return on investment, right? So, hey, we gave you $5, you brought in another 10, and you had so many more completions as a result, but I'm only judging you on the 5 we gave you. Does that make sense? Okay, so the return on investment. So those efforts that are underway in this area can, right, if tracked appropriately, play a big role in that.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing. My first question is, who came up with the grading formula?
So the REACH office. So yeah, and actually, so that was a. All right, so let me back that a little bit. So the REACH office was charged with developing this methodology. The process for development included a number of stakeholder meetings, probably about over 12 months, that included local workforce development board representatives, economic development, education representatives, everybody kind of coming together like, what do we have, what data do we have that we can trust, right? What aligns with what really personifies, for example, as kind of what it is we do as a workforce board, okay? And what can we track, and how do we meet the letter of the law? So over 12 months, I think at regular meetings of those folks, this came out. Okay, so.
The second part of that is this tracking data and outcomes something that the workforce boards, the local workforce boards are already doing, or are they extrapolating this data somehow?
So yes and no.
Okay.
So yes and no. So let me finish out the extra credit, because I want to make sure that this gets touched, because it is Chad brought up. The extra credit, serving individuals on public assistance, right? I think there was a strong sentiment, among the folks in that work group that, hey, when you're working with folks that you really are struggling, it's harder to get outcomes. Okay? But we didn't want to penalize boards for working with folks who really need help, right? And really could gain advantage from the services that are provided. So we turned that into an extra credit measure. So if John said you have a high percentage of the folks that you're serving that are on public assistance, you earn more kind of extra credit right in that realm. So getting back to your question, the top two measures are brand new. So participants with increased earnings and reduction in public assistance required a data sharing agreement through the Department of Education over to the Department of Children and Families to get this data, who's on public assistance and who's not on public assistance anymore. And also on the increased earnings. So those two were new, and so local workforce boards probably don't have the ability to do that. We're also, and you'll hear about this on Thursday, there's a technical assistance call for the local kind of operations folks who are tracking this. There's PII and personally identifiable information that's including that, so it can't really be made available yet. But Career Source Board, my team is working very hard on a couple things. One, this is all on the website, right? So quarter one will be updated later this week, so there's visibility throughout the year. So you know your report card, your quarterly report cards before the final grade. That makes sense. But also getting down to the case level details so you can watch this. Department of Economic Opportunity, make all the queries available so that it can be monitored locally, right? And kept track of. We don't want this to be a surprise. You're an A, right? Or not, right? You're like, I had no idea what was happening. So really our charge and emphasis is on how do we get regular, consistent, and timely reports. Granted, 6 months after the end of the quarter, right? Not very timely, but please respect there's a lot of data going back and forth and data sharing agreements and figuring out those calculations. So we're going to try to get that on a much tighter schedule.
So
you
did say you'd have access to numerator and denominator data.
Yes. Yeah, you'll get numbers for numerator and denominator. Sure.
So two things. One, I must have missed it. Can you explain how business penetration is actually measured? And number two is, are all 8 measures weighted equally?
They're not weighted equally. So first, I'll start with the second. So the first two, continued repeat business and year-over-year business penetration, are taken directly from what's tracked in Employ Florida, which is our database. The continued repeat businesses, businesses that you served in the last 3 years, how many did you serve in the last year? So you continue to serve those businesses. And then year
Serving them means what?
we have a number, I forget how many, but there's 50 codes that you, service codes that they were put in the system where it counted as a business service. Right? They're everything from
Job order.
job orders,
Contracts.
placement, recruitment services.
So it doesn't necessarily mean the local board is touching that business.
It does mean the local board is touching. It would mean that the local board is touching.
We have to.
Yeah.
And it has to be meaningful.
Yeah. And then the second, and then the year-over-year business penetration takes kind of last year, how many businesses did you serve over how many businesses were in the area versus how many businesses did you serve this year versus how many businesses in the area. What's that delta? Right, that's what that is.
Thank you.
And your second question, was there a second one?
You said.
Oh, the majority, they're weighted equally. No, they're not weighted equally. The law says the majority is participants with increased earnings and reduction in public assistance, so that's 25%, 25%. We also heard very strongly from the stakeholders, don't take away our federal performance measures. That's our bread and butter. That's what determines our existence. So that's 20%, right? The two business measures, I think, are 5% each. Participants in work-related training, I think, is 10. Where are we at now? The completion of funding, I think, is 10. So that's how they weight it out.
Thank you.
They're different weights.
Dan, are you going to say at all our preliminary number, or letter grade here?
I don't know what yours are.
So we have an A-, which I'm very proud of. So just so everybody here is aware of how we're holding up against all of those measures so far.
Yeah, and look, it's a new thing, and I think what the intent was, right? And if you've been in workforce, you're like, how are you doing? Like, well, let me tell you how I'm doing. The people I worked with a year ago, this is the percent that are employed now, and these were the ones that I worked a year and a half ago. It's all very weird, right? So I think what the legislature was looking to do, right, as they did with the education system, like, can we simplify kind of how are they doing, right? And let's do that. Can we simplify that? And I think that's what was happening there. So how do we simplify that so that people from the outside world can get a relative understanding? Like if I looked at all 24 workforce boards and relative letter grades, okay, here's the range, here's what they're doing. Because when you start getting into the federal performance measures, it gets it's a long conversation. It's a really long conversation. Okay, how to explain. So what questions, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share kind of a lot of what we're doing at the state level. What questions might I answer for you today?
Just wondering, as a governance board that we are in relationship to this grading system that you have, how does that affect then the role of the board with respect to its evaluation of its own performance and even the performance of its?
Yeah, I think you care about what you measure, right? So I think putting those letter grades out there, and I haven't heard or seen any initiatives that have come out of any region, definitely not this one, that are counter to any of these measures. Okay, in fact, as I mentioned before, with that completion of funding ratio, you're probably one of a very small handful of boards that do a great job with those extra discretionary dollars that can really kind of jump that up. Right? So again, I think it's an intent to make it easy for somebody to say, how are we stacked up across the board? So pay attention. So to answer your question directly, pay attention. When you're doing initiatives, ask yourself, which of those are going to count, right? And is what I'm doing at the local workforce development board, is what I'm emphasizing and what I'm prioritizing in line with the weighting of those grades, right? If 50% is getting increased earnings and getting people on public assistance, are your initiatives aligned with that, right? That's like saying, I'm only going to do quizzes when the final grade is 80% of my grade. I'm not going to worry about it. Right? So you have to think about it in those terms. Are my efforts commensurate with the state, how the state's weighing in?
And I don't know if you've gotten feedback or if you have it, you could share. You talked about, and I'm just kind of going on the completion funding ratio kind of issue, not issue, but topic. Do you have or have you gotten feedback that there are boards that are a little bit concerned from a realignment perspective that the relationships they've built to get some additional or discretionary funding may take a step backwards, if a realignment occurs?
Yeah, I think there's a general concern by that, but I think it's not an easy response, right? But the response is donations are always directed, right? Donations are always discretionary, right? So if 4 counties, were realigned and that became one workforce development board, each county had county dollars that were going to their individual workforce development board before, I don't see anything that would change that. I don't see anything that would change that. The dollars can still be directed. But I think there's a legitimate concern because that is more confusing. Right? That is harder. That is more, right? So I can see that. But I would, I said I like sunrise because of hope and what new challenges the day bring, right? But if you think about, could 4 counties next to each other direct all of their dollars the same, right, for that 4-county area? And ensure that they go to their counties and their residents and their people, but be directed the same way. Because the thing that I heard in the stakeholder engagement meetings that I sat in, were we cause consternation. Okay, our system causes consternation. A business that works in one county and another county and has people in both counties can do one thing in one county, but can't do the same thing in the next county. Education providers that straddle line wonder, hey, how come my students from this county can get $5,000 for their tuition, but over here, they can only get $2,000? So you hear those things. So when you think about the opportunities for coordination, the opportunities for kind of consistency, right, in those labor sheds where they matter. And I'm not saying Chipola and Miami need to have the same policies, right? Those are 2 very different economies, 2 very different geographies. But when there's a seamless labor shed, right, how does that happen, right? Or how might that happen? How can we reduce the consternation to provide stronger, more aligned services? How can we have the same partnerships with our education providers, same partnerships with our public assistance providers across the board? Our nonprofits straddle lines very differently than we straddle lines, right? Or than the lines we've created. So I think that's what the opportunity is. But yeah, I think it'll be.
Has there been any discussion about findings, not those, but some efficiencies in Tallahassee?
Yeah, so when I said, hey, I think what you're going to see are solutions that hit on all of these. A, reduce the number of workers, or B, where are the efficiencies that the state, right, that it could provide? Could the Department of Economic Opportunity have a single OJT contract for the state, thus reducing some of that consternation? Could there be consistency in those areas that could make things a lot easier? From a planning perspective, from like a Rio plan perspective, a local plan perspective, are there things that can happen there? So I think you'll see, right, things hit on a number of different issues. Because the stakeholder engagement and the feedback I was received didn't just focus on this, it focused on some inefficiencies. Some inefficiencies were probably, why is this that way? Why is it like, hey, that's a great question. That could probably be solved in another way, right? So that's a great point. What other questions? Yeah, Gary.
Timeline for completion and implementation
That's a
for
great question.
realignment.
Man, that is a good question.
Are they going to make recommendations in February?
Yeah, so I think that's still being kind of worked out. What is that recommendation going to be? What is the action of the state board, the governor, and look, the governor designates the area, right? The governor designates the area. So how does that process work? What's the timeline to, look, if you were to combine 2 people, that takes some time, right? If you were to move one to another, I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a fantastic question. I know, if you wanted, the next time we have to do estate plans in 2024, that would be a great time for all of this to be done, but that feels scary. Man, that feels scary, yeah.
I think the unintended consequence of what you're describing, though, is it's going to put a premium on who sits on what boards. So you get the right representation. It's going to bring up the topics of board succession. You're going to have to be thinking about that as part of what happens, because board makeups are going to have to change if you're going to go.
They will have to change, you're right.
In terms of quality people and the industries.
And there is no cap on board size. Like that's the other kind of, there's an operational consideration, like a logistical consideration, like was the 100-person board meaningful? Like, are we really doing work? You're absolutely right. Yeah, it changes the landscape of how it operates and how what's happening in this room today, right? Strategy, guidance, what are we doing, what are we focused on, what are the needs of our community? The only thing that changes is the definition of our community, right? So our community could become larger or different, or bring in a different, different areas. That's the only thing that changes. The rest of the discussion stays the same, right? And how do we do it? I'm over, I'm cutting in a break. I apologize, but good. I'm here, unfortunately I have to leave the next hour or so, but I'm happy to answer questions at break or commiserate.
Dan McGrew, everyone.
And I'm not holding the overage time on here.
Oh, thanks.
It was a great discussion, and that's why we're here, and I appreciate the questions. I feel it's really worth your time. And I don't know if you noticed, but last Thursday, we had to make a last-minute change, and Dan stepped up and said, I'll come down from Tallahassee, so thank you, Dan, for doing that. Appreciate
You got it.
We're going to take a break. I'm going to give you 10 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes. If you could do me one big favor, because we're going to put some tablecloths on there as they prepare for lunch. If you could just put everything on your chair before you leave for a break, and we'll be back here in 15. Thank you.
Would you please welcome April Torrigiante.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Are we all awake and shaken now that we've had a little break? All right. I'm going to put you on the spot over here and ask, we are going to do a group activity, so would you mind coming over here and we're going to consolidate a little bit. So, thing going here and make sure I'm going the right way. Oh, there's me. Okay. I am using the microphone because I love using the microphone, so whether I need to or not, I'm going to use it. We have a really, really broad discussion today. Our topic is very broad, so future workforce is something that is just enormous. And we're going to try to trickle down to a few topics and engage everybody in some brainstorming and kind of looking at some topics. There are some worksheets on all the tables. So as we go through the introduction and the instructions, then we'll start talking about some topics, and we really want to kind of get into your brains and get the juices flowing and get some solutions going for some of the topics that are affecting our future workforce and how we are approaching that workforce and how we're serving and getting that workforce ready to serve our community. So Franklin D. Roosevelt can get lots of nuggets from him, but we can't always build a future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future, and that's what we're here to do. I'm not going to read through all these instructions in terms of breakout sessions and group sessions. I'm sure you've all experienced them before. It isn't new. We're not going to club each other over the head. We're going to be respectful. We're going to discuss our questions and solutions, and then look at our feedback, listen to that feedback, and work with you to jot all that down and then recap it later. I had mentioned the worksheets on your table. There's pens and worksheets to kind of help you work through your solutions if you need them. And our goal. So we're going to be simple with this. We just want to try to get as many solutions as possible, and we want all of your ideas, not just the good ones. So the way we learn, work, and live is changing even faster than we realize, but how is it affecting our young adults and our youth who are our future workforce? So we're going to take a collaborative approach to tackle some of these topics. And, Mr. Painter had made everything that he talked about impacts the topic that we're talking about today. But he did mention that we don't have enough workforce to fill those critical positions. So the questions that we are going to be talking about, kind of brainstorming on, are going to touch how do we build that workforce to fill those critical positions. So just a funny thing that we can do kind of to shake it up a little bit is our warm-up. So if you could think about the funniest thing that happened to you recently and let us know in 60 seconds or less. Anybody, just jump up. Funny thing, crazy thing that happened to you? Okay, yes,
I went
ma'am.
to a New Year's party and they actually play a football game through that. Hell, that was not a party.
Football and party, New Year's Eve parties, yeah. Yeah, that is silly. Silly. Anybody else? Funny thing that happened to you?
I went to a party as well that was, it was told to me that it was supposed to be like gaudy jewelry, but I took that to mean like fake jewelry, so I had like the Party City plastic ring and everything, and then I got there and it was actual rich people.
Wearing their bubbles. So conversation starter then, right?
Oh,
Like you were the life of the
class
party?
clown, you know.
Anybody else? Funny thing, yes ma'am.
I have an amazing kid and a daughter, and we were out grocery shopping and we were having a little discussion, and I told her, I eat kids like you for breakfast. When we got down to candy aisle, she threw Sour Patch Kids in the cart.
Sour but sweet, right? Yes.
My little boy just peed in the tree in between the mall, walking. He did that over the holidays. It was pretty embarrassing.
I'm a mother of two boys, so I feel you.
Just stopped and did it.
Any more funny stuff? I saw some hands up over here. No? No? Just a funny thing that happened to you recently.
It's funny to me, but it's going to be not funny to a lot of people. My son wanted something for, he was with his mom and they were traveling. He wanted something that, he asked his mom, she said no, and he asked me, and we found out that he was trying to play both sides.
Yeah, playing, yeah.
So he kept FaceTiming me and begging me for this. I said, no, your mom already said no. So then he FaceTimes me again for 2 seconds, just to get just to give me the middle finger. And then hung up. I don't know if that's funny or not, but it's funny to me.
It's pretty funny, Sean.
It depends on what I teach myself.
Well, thank you for participating, kind of giving some brevity, to the day, and we appreciate that now that we're kind of all warmed up. I just wanted to go over some of the work group topics, but in the meantime, I wanted to introduce Leandra Foster, our Director of Youth Services. She's going to help us through the next 40 minutes, and actually not going to be 40 minutes, more like 20. But she's going to help us to record the information and jot down all of your ingenious ideas on our technologically advanced gigantic Post-it note transcription system. And just kind of help us through. She has a lot of experience with our youth, and we'll be walking around a little bit while everybody's kind of thinking and pondering and writing things down and kind of helping to jazz up the situation. So I just wanted to introduce her to y'all. So our work group topics, I'm going to talk for a minute just about adapting to the future of work, and then some of the questions that we're asking y'all to ponder is expanding access to employment and capturing feedback from youth. So adapting to the future of work, we know that there are multiple things that are affecting the young generation of workforce. There's new behaviors, generational shifts. We're having technology explosions that affect everything we do on a daily basis. New ideals are presenting in the workforce, mobility issues, and also globalization. So I just have this neat little thing that I put up here. It doesn't have generational shifts on it, but that's something that we are absolutely seeing of trends that are shaping the future of work. And our new behaviors are being highly affected and shaped by social media and the web, and shaping the ideals and the things that our young people are thinking of and striving for as they're moving forward with determining what career path they're going to take and what's important to them. And then number two, the technology shift to the cloud and collaborative technologies and the Internet of Things and being able to just have everything at your fingertips shapes everything. Our workforce, again, new attitudes, expectations, what they expect when they go to an employer and how they feel that they're going to be treated, and again, what's important to them. And mobility in the fact that they can work from anywhere. So why should they work for your business? Or why should they learn about your industry? And can it give them the mobility that they're used to or that they're looking for in the new workforce? And then globalization, again, kind of goes with mobility, that they're not bound specifically to the United States anymore. There are positions available throughout the world that they have access to. So just kind of touching on a couple of those things as we move into the next topics to have in mind as we think about strategies to be able to capture the feedback or the young people and their thoughts and where they're at and how do we reach them and then help to mold them into our view of workforce. So we are in groups, y'all are already at your tables. We're going to do a quick individual and group reflection and discussion, and then we're going to report the feedback. And we're going to do this kind of super zoomy so that we can stay on track here, because I think I have 15 minutes left. So our first topic, and for those of you on your table, you may have either topic number 1 or topic number 2. So if you want to grab the worksheets, you can see if you have topic 1 or topic 2, because we kind of wanted to break it up. Because there's a lot to unpack here and we only have a few minutes to do it. So expanding access to employment. There's a few questions on there and there's a spot for you to write down some solutions. How do we increase the opportunities for our youth with barriers? How do we identify solutions that are driven by our communities? And how do we engage young people and use their experience and their contributions? So how do we think about it from their point of view and what they've experienced and what they're bringing to the table and how they're going to contribute to the future, and how do we recognize challenges to be able to identify that there is something that we have to work through in order to find employment for young people, and how do we recognize those things and then get to the next step. For those of you with topic 2, we're looking at trying to capture the feedback of our youth. What's important to young people when they're looking for work? How do we attract a younger workforce to fill those gaps? And how do we approach getting the feedback from our young people? How do we get them to the room and get that conversation going so that we can get that feedback from them? And what is some feedback that you might be hearing from young people in your communities? Yes?
Just a quick question. What's the actual age you're looking for? Age group, I'm sorry.
It's going to be 16 to 24.
Okay, thank you.
We could definitely be 14 to 24, right?
So as we're looking at that, before we start talking together as a group, and I see some of you are already on track with what I'm thinking of, and we're going to do an individual brainstorm. We're going to give you a minute or 2 to think of as many solutions that come to your mind as possible, and then jot them down again. Even if you don't think they're great, we're looking for everything that you can. So we'll give you 2 minutes to kind of just jot some solutions down, and then we'll come to the group portion. I wish I had some Jeopardy music or something.
You can take a little extra
Sing, but then you'd all be distracted. I'll be generous and give you another minute or two.
No problem. All right.
This is the best you're
All right, so let's start wrapping up. Remember, people, put your thoughts down. All right, so we are going to go ahead and kind of build on what you've started in your individual brainstorm and move into the small group discussions. So amongst your fellow table mates, we're going to ask for you to kind of go over the topics that you have at your table and what you've written down, and then discuss and talk amongst yourselves to see if we can expand upon what you've written individually, and then get some topics for your group to report out. And then it probably might be a good time for you to identify maybe someone at your table who might be your mouthpiece at the end.
Question, are we sitting by committee? Because I know I'm with you. I don't know.
Nope, this is just, yep, at random board members, you're gonna all, discuss together and kind of work together to see what you can come up with. Okay, so we'll discuss amongst yourselves and see what we can get, and we'll give you 10 minutes to come up with your solutions, and then we'll report those out, and the lovely Miss Leandra will write them down for us.
So we want to pass these all and have one person? I'm moderating, so I apologize.
No, we think you should.
And then Michelle's giving a presentation.
Yeah, I think it's kind of vague.
Community.
Oh, they were on the screen.
How do they know what the questions were for, like, how to identify community barriers? These are the questions.
But then also,
Yeah, this is topic 1, and then there's some papers in topic 2. Here.
I think the question was,
Yeah, it says how do we get.
how do you define, what is it is, community-driven solutions that you can cultivate to promote that? Because I don't think how to identify similar kinds of things that would help build our work.
Okay, so you want me to tell you specifically?
Well, we don't know how to answer So what do you need?
Like, when community identities and partners get together to devise different types of initiatives and programs in order to serve the youth in their community. You know, what does that look like? Right, like specifically, what are some things that could, that you could create in order to, you know, like not a solution, but, you know, an after-school program that would identify this specific challenge or barrier that you could put those people together.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, we didn't do 2. They're all done in 1. I didn't realize it was 2.
No, there's 2 topics, but we all did topic 1.
How would we expand access to employment, and what would a community-driven solution look like for that?
I did already. Their level, offer a program that meets their needs. We're not doing that right now. We're very bored.
I said facilitate transportation, implement career resources and training at schools, and provide resources to parents and youth and meet their basic needs.
How to engage you, utilizing their experience and contributions.
What are some of the barriers we're having for not getting this? I will tell you a big one for us is drugs.
Yeah, that's really.
The concept, a lot of it's like a lecture sharing, kind of just giving them what all employers do. See, the thing is, a lot of times people don't realize that certain drugs they can. I mean, I haven't had what you think that how they drug use, but they don't have maybe it's even maybe a way to highlight things that doesn't their age. It's all of those. I remember when I was at the Education Foundation, but there's also two young men in high school who reached out about what the possibility of going because they were building an online tutoring platform. They were employing their peers, kind of match so they were free for peers. I think part of the lawyers will work with people and free assistance during a time when
When the sheriff's office was a drug issue, we would put on the application 6 months, no drug use within 6 months, and we would be highlighting. And they did give people an opportunity after 6 months to apply.
That's awesome.
That's changed, you know. 10 years ago, any drug use, you're done forever. Now it's like,
And drug testing changes, you know, some states you have to have a state mandated drug testing policy that goes to auto and certain or however you can define it. In some states, the state approves drug testing. You know, so what I have is stringent employers saying, you know, like, I don't want to.
I was just gonna ask that.
So when marijuana is legal, because I can state that marijuana is legal. Oh, got it. Okay, so that. The only time you show that they should, like construction, driving,
So, when people apply for
so like,
do they get that card and
which is basically, it's kind of the same. But the medical marijuana, and it kind of designates, because it's dispensary, so I was just saying, we have a lot of experience, more than a lot of they have 3 or 4. So the one that I
horrible experience at McDonald's. One of the shakes, you had for a while. They didn't have any ice cream in the shake maker or whatever.
We're trying to maintain the level of virtual reality.
So I said, I'll have a how hard was that? 20 minutes later, and the guy, the kid up front goes, what'd you want? And then, you tell the supervisor, he's a caretaker with him, he goes, here's the hamburger, and here's the Diet Coke. A $3 order. 20 minutes for a $3 order.
They are great. One of my friends might create this thing, they wouldn't do that otherwise. I was great. That was pretty similar. It's just worded differently. So refresh.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's one of those things, right, where we can sit here and we can say, oh, well, this is the challenge, this is the challenge, this is the challenge. So you have to first change it to somebody and say, no, actually, I think the challenge is a strength for me because that's the motivator to overcome, the motivator to try. So, okay, so I'm getting.
Yeah, so
yeah.
No, they had chicken. They didn't have any other side. And then they only had cookie.
Yeah,
So, all right, so I hit that.
There may be somebody who can look at it in their environment. Their father has a way of something. Actually,
And they had a white styrofoam saying, I mean,
are things difficult sometimes? Yeah, but it's helped in all.
because really they're chicken.
Right, do we need to do that other thing?
They're college.
That's the main generation work. Proximity and
Closeness to home. Can it be agreeable? And they want
Meaningful salary.
So, and this, oh my, this is good to dig in and start pulling some reports again.
A lot of our population has not been in college.
I hire and luckily we have the presence of but the other like the other thing that we have to do, I think as part of this is that being a talent is very forward. Because we basically systems on what the young business develops the phone there, the iPod, and it's kind of dull. So we had to look at how we can process technology to kind of engage with projects. Because
It's so inspiring to see all the different conversations that we have going on right now.
Some of the design though,
We are going to go ahead and start getting your feedback, so if you'd like to start wrapping up your conversations and determining who will be reporting out the solutions for your table.
how do we track it out of the workforce?
I think the thing to understand is so many people come to us saying how long
How do we approach gathering feedback from you?
here's how I do that. It's like streamline the process. So I think once the conversation starts, the first 9 days, two hurricanes.
How do we approach gathering feedback from you? Games I can do, like surveys.
Okay, so we are going to start reporting out our feedback, so if you'll make your way back to your seats. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start reporting back our feedback. So we'll start here with Sophia and Mike. You look ready and that you've wrapped up all of your solutions. So if you'd like to go ahead and let us know what your topic was and then the solutions that you came up with for your questions.
We're going to, Sophie and I took on the topic capturing youth feedback. And in no certain order, it was like, it was this. What is important to the younger generation for searching for work? And a couple of thoughts we had there. First of all, the initial contact back needs to be within 48 to 72 hours at the most. Whoever replies back should be high energy, excited about where they work, promote the value of their work in the workplace community, stress purpose in what they do, and then also that actions that they take or anything that they do that shows initiative in the job market could, or in their job could turn into bigger jobs down the road. They should have mentorship available 24/7 with the whole idea of impact in mind, and particularly where do they fit in so that people understand the fit and purpose. How do we attract the younger workforce? Not exactly the most biggest idea right now, but things like TikTok videos are similar, to show, and again, showcasing purpose, tie back to jobs and career pathways, stress life and work balance, and tools that explain the return on investment in kids' terms so they understand kind of what they're doing and what their role is. Question 3, how do we approach gathering feedback from youth and adults? We kind of agree there's maybe one big thing, just talk to them. No surveys, ask the why. Get behind it and understand why they feel like the way they do. So appreciate and value that. And what are you hearing from youth in our business and community? Number one, we both kind of come out of the same area, but it's a small business community. It's preferred to large businesses. Large businesses have a lot of bureaucracy and so forth to go through that small business doesn't have to. And to that, probably the so what of that is go walk the halls. I mean, USF Incubator is a good place to start. The Embark Collective There's no reason why, you know, we can't go walk the hall and talk about the youth employment programs there. These small companies want to hire, and you make it easy by paying for it, so but you're going to have to make it easy for them to execute a playbook of some kind that shows them how to think about what to do. Because this isn't something a CEO / founder / whatever chief bottle washer is going to do. But if you give them a suggested playbook, they're more likely to do it, and that's something companies will be interested in. Did I miss anything, Boston? Okay, very good.
All right, thank you. That was some really good information. Also, we're going to be collecting the worksheets at the end after we go through everybody's report out, so that then we can have all of your wonderful notes and kind of marinate on that and see, you know, what we can come up with. So thank you so much. All right, next group, we can pass the microphone. Okay, great.
Our question, our topic was expanding access to employment. The 4 questions, we spent the majority of our time on question 1. We found it to be a good question, one that was pretty wide. How to increase opportunities for youth and young adults with barriers? A couple of our points of discussion or suggestion was to identify jobs near where they live. One of the barriers may be transportation. So trying to minimize that as a barrier if we can find opportunities near where they live. Also understanding the value of whatever the opportunities are, the wages are going to have to be more than $10 or $12 an hour. A couple of years ago, we tried an internship program. The wages were $10, $11 an hour. We got a couple of takers. And some of the response was, number one, they expected they were going to get $20 an hour. And number two, they actually could at McDonald's get $14 an hour. So we have to understand that what the market is and be able to be competitive with that. Some pre-employment training. There may be a need for some soft skills training, just some basic level of the value of showing up to work every day on time, operative word every day, not once a week or 1 week until you get paid for coming back. And the opportunity to possibly engage their peers and parents. The younger they are, we have the age group of 16 to 24, the younger they are, the more influential the parents and peers are going to be. So where we're able to identify and engage those is valuable doing that. Maybe subsidizing the wages. Maybe the employer may not want to take on that $15 an hour. Maybe there's a partnership, another program that may come in and get the total wage up to whatever it may be. Identifying their interests. What is their interest? Helping them identify what their interest is and how they could maximize or monetize what that interest may be. They may not know that based on their interest there are careers for that. So helping them identify what their interest or aptitude is and how they could turn that into an actual career. The second question, well, we didn't really get to it as a group, but I'll take a stab at it. If anyone around the table would like to add, feel free to do that. The question number 2 is how to identify community-driven solutions, partner with community-based organizations, those who are out there at the ground level meeting that need. So we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. Let's partner with someone who's already working in that area. Anyone like to add anything? That's it.
Thank you so much. And I do have a kind of question to pose to you as well, and for all of our small and large, business owners and officers here. How would we be able to approach the subject of increased wages and mentorship within our local businesses? So how do we get the business owners on board to let them know why it would be beneficial to increase their wages for an entry-level staff person, and to be able to have that training and mentorship component to help somebody along throughout the beginning of their tenure there, so they can become a valued employee?
Directed to me?
No, just anyone. I mean, it posed the question in my mind.
Well, that is a hard conversation, but it's one nevertheless that has a big need. Because understanding that employers obviously need workforce, and the workforce is looking for an opportunity that's going to meet their need. And part of the need is going to be based on what's that hourly wage. So that was an answer, but it wasn't maybe a direct answer to how do you have that conversation, but there's a need for that conversation, yes.
Thank you so much.
Let me just jump in and say, one of the really interesting practices that I saw partly address that was a partnership between the Workforce Board and their chapter of SHRM. And what they got to do was to design a half-day together that SHRM then allowed as continuing education credits. But what it was a conversation around what the board understood around the demographics and labor market, labor supply in the region. And then the conversation was around how do you tap underutilized labor forces. So there was a manufacturer who talked about how they had brought on formerly incarcerated individuals onto their payroll, and the things they did, they changed about their onboarding. And then their observations about those individuals as employees. But it was a great way to get that HR view into the room at the same time the board was educating HR people as to what's that labor supply that's out there, what does it look like. So that may be something that you want to think about. Can you put together that kind of session to get that back and forth? How do we change onboarding? How do we change, what could our role be in developing that mentorship?
So, great point that Ron brought up, but to add to that, I think corporations and really the face of our country is looking at, do we need a required prerequisite of a bachelor's, master's, or PhD to accomplish a job responsibility? Is a bachelor's degree more than what's necessary? So if an individual with a high school diploma with the appropriate set of skill sets and competencies that can be trained on duty, will that person be able to match the same kind of job function? So that's one piece. The second piece, as a business owner, so it's kind of difficult having the conversation about increasing salary or increasing wage, because part of the conversation has to be, are my margins there to be able to increase that pay? So, and then in addition to that, so when you start increasing pay, there's ancillary effects to that, such as employer-related taxes and workers' comp. All of those things are drivers, and it hits my bottom line. So my margin may have been 20% that was workable at whatever wage that may have been for my workforce, but now we increase that by 8 or 10 or 20%. Now that looks a lot different. Not only I may be able to afford the flat increase, but the ancillary expenses that come along with that now push me to a point where I truly become a nonprofit. So,
Especially when the money revenue is capped by the state government floor.
absolutely,
right? Yeah.
yes.
So then is it, and I'm sorry, I know Mike, that you have a point, is it then that we have to look at other ways that we can encourage individuals to apply for those jobs with promotional opportunities or mentorship opportunities, or less tangible things and more appealing to what young individuals want, which is career advancement, to learn, do things, but then we have to start looking at those types of things if we can't make up for it in the salary.
I think that's an integral part of the conversation. However, with inflation and just the cost of living, the affordability of living, especially in our region, salary has to be part of the conversation. You know, there's no way to say, you know, I love you, here's our purpose and our mission. So, but your red and Tico are going to have to wait.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great point. It has to be a part of the conversation, but at this point, our country's history, more specifically in Tampa, you know, with the cost of living is.
Gary, getting your first point about there is a movement towards skill-based hiring.
Yes.
Skill-based practices now, where they're less focused on degrees and more on your KSAs that you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's encouraging.
I'll give you the Yale vote on that.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of times people don't take into account the cost of rehiring. And, you know, when I talk to small businesses, that's usually what we talk about. You want to, you know, and big companies have salary bands and, you know, tend to play that pretty well. I had to manage that for a long time. When you get into small companies, you'll find culture matters as much as anything. And if you find somebody that's a pretty good fit, you can do some other things flexibly around incentives and whatever that might be, right, to be able to address that. So I find small companies are more than willing to, when they think about the bigger picture, which is the cost of rehire. How hard is it to hire? In big companies, there's a lot of people who do that. Small companies, this doesn't happen that much. So when you stop to account for that, you say, if I can cut this down to where I'm not hiring this role but every second year, is there value there?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Thank you so much. So our next table.
All right, for us, for what is important to our younger generation when searching for work, we put technology-based jobs, more modern technology-based jobs, what they're looking at, what they're wanting to know what type of money they can make, hourly rate, salary, right now versus putting the work in like a lot of us have. Flexibility, flexibility and working remotely seems to be another thing that we came up with, and they are looking at sign-on bonuses. All right, how do we attract the younger workforce? Question 2, going and meeting them where they're at, and actually having conversations with them where they live at, where they're, you know, where they work at currently, and where they, yeah. QR codes was another thing we came up with. Anything that has to do with QR codes, it seems like they're very responsive to that. Incentive-based jobs as well. Social media, learned it on, they learned, if you put it on TikTok, they're going to figure it out. So social media, learn it on TikTok, education platform. You can educate them through social media, possibly, for attract them to different job opportunities. If you're an employer and you're wanting to hire these young kids, you might want to advertise that you have a healthy workplace and that you are engaging in existing activities that, you know, that's especially what's going on within the youth culture. Higher wages. That closes that question. The third question, how do we approach gathering feedback from youth and young adults? We put surveys through social media, polls, etc. Facebook school district surveys, guest speakers. You want to touch on gig?
Yeah, offer a gig job. They're always looking for money, so if you offer money, they'll give you a feedback of the survey.
And then our fourth question is, what are you hearing from youth and your businesses and communities? That we're hearing that they feel left out of the job market. There's definitely a skills gap between the people working now and them. They feel like they should make more money, even though they don't have the experience. Gen Z, the employer, this goes back to what we were saying. If you're going to be an employer in 2023, you better be schooled up on social justice and equitable culture. And also get work.
Thanks, Graham.
So we have question 1, how to increase opportunities for youth and adults with barriers. Number 1 is we need to create new opportunities, if that makes sense, like what we did with summer hires, because let's face it, in this labor market right now, opportunities for youth to enter the labor force aren't as plentiful as they once were. So creating programs like summer hires that don't just focus on more of a municipal type jobs program, but really kind of match student interest with employer and try to match it on that standpoint, I think is really important. And I think the second most important part of that is we're not going to be able to fund it in a vacuum forever, right? It just can't be TANF funds going forward. At some point, we've got to create more employer and philanthropic and government partnerships, mostly on the employer side. Like if you look at some of the, Philadelphia through PYN, they have a significant portion of their funding through private philanthropy and through the business community. Doing those things are critically important. Providing more career exploration opportunities for youth, particularly for those 14, 15, and 16-year-olds that are just starting to get interested in work. creating more opportunities for them to learn about the nature of work, the industries in where they live, geographically located to their neighborhoods are important. And we need to have better saturation. The answer to youth engagement is not driving them up to 9215 North Florida. It is being in their community. So divesting maybe a little bit more in brick and mortar and a little bit more in technology and better partnerships with community organizations that allow us to have a presence there is important. We're already doing that, but we need to do much better and much more purposeful at it. Some solutions, again, I talked about public-private partnership and private investment. I'll go back to Ron's statement about 52% of all employees think their employers need upskilling. That's the number that should scare everybody. Better grading resources and better aligning entities. Dan talked a little bit about it in the REACH Act, but making sure that our resources are simpatico with education, with DVR, with all of our other mandatory partners. And instead of we don't compete, I don't mean to say that, but a lot of our programs are pretty siloed, right? So how do we make them less siloed, break them down a little bit, and create more? And then, obviously, technology plays a huge role. Get something in front of the hands of youth that engages them, and it's not a billboard. It's not something they see on the side of the road. It is, through the technology space, whether it's a Facebook page, TikTok, Instagram. We have Facebook and Instagram pages.
Yes.
We don't have, do we have a TikTok page?
Yes.
We do? Get it.
Yes.
So push that as well.
We just need content.
Really, I think that the biggest thing is meeting our kids where they're at, instead of driving them. Did I miss anything, guys? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, Mercedes here.
On number 3, that we were talking about how to engage youth, utilizing their experiences and contributions, and that one will be definitely for this particular age group, connected with schools, where they could create an app. Everybody has a phone, where they can just go ahead and put in there what will be the career of choice, if they can have it that way, whichever kind of way, where we will not get names, but we can get age and data. And that way we can see in which way not only career choice, but what direction we should go. And the other one that I think you guys mentioned on this table, on number 4, we need to be very careful with the crystal generation that we are dealing with. I don't know if you guys know that they got a name, and it's called crystal. Some of us have X, some of us have Y. There's a crystal, which means they break less easily. They do, and we're dealing with a whole gender identity. So we have to be very careful, and right now, we used to just ask for gender before, male or female. And now we can do, or I don't want to answer. Just to entertain them.
Thank you so much. And those were a lot of really great points, and I think it kind of segues really nicely into our next presentation and our next speakers, who are going to talk about the system restructure. And I'd like to invite Kay and Michelle to come up and begin their presentation. We are going to go ahead and come around and collect those worksheets so that then we can marinate on all the great information that you've provided and help us to come up with some new strategies. Thank you so much, ladies.
Great job, baby.
We're ready? All right. So it's really going to be an open discussion, looking for your feedback on a new way that we can move forward for the organization, focusing on one of the objectives in our strategic plan, and that's expanding revenue sources that would enable us to serve more individuals as well as more organizations and really expand our reach in the community. So that what we're looking at right now to expand those revenue sources are some fee-for-service initiatives, and that we focus on the business community. John, did you want to talk a little bit about?
Other than, I think as a board, you guys have heard me talk about this a lot, is the ability to create diverse revenue, and one of the ways to do it is fee for service. Two things need to happen. Number one, we need to make sure that as an organization, we're ready to do that. And that's two things. Number one, getting the requisite feedback from the community if there's a need there, right? And then number two is having the capacity internally to do it. I know Mike and I have talked a couple of times about, there are events and outreach, to be able to do this at the time you want, ready to be able to commit time and resources. So really kind of stepping back from that, creating more of a plan on, okay, how are we going to roll this out? What's the primary funding mechanism going to be until we get on our feet? Because in order to generate revenue, we have to have some revenue, right? So really looking at it through that lens, and then, in some things we've been successful, like our partnership with the United Way Suncoast, we're providing, a fee for service for research services for them. It's been a great tool and a model. Probably time for us to expand into that area as well, but then also the other traditional fee for services like fractional finance or fractional human resources, things like that. So I don't know if we sent it out yet, but we've got a survey ready to go to all of our folks on, is it Salesforce? Is that what body are we in? Contact. So we're going to send out, the survey to all of our folks on contact, because I want to identify the gap in the need because identifying the gap in the need is important, so we don't feel our competition to other people in the same space. So getting that information is important, but we've already identified some things that we've done, like our partnership with the United Way that are pretty cool and set a really good footing for us to do this. But I think it's, as a board and as an organization, one of the most important things we can do, just if you look at it through the lens of being able to continue to serve our community in a time where it's growing, where the need is growing, but resources from the federal and state level are pretty much stagnant.
So we'll be sending out a survey to business community as well as the board, of course, to get some feedback on specific services where there may be a need, and also doing research, to identify those gaps. So John had some examples of, HR services, fractional HR, fractional accounting, things like that. So we kind of want your feedback on any thoughts that you may have as business owners and in the community or other organizations that have need for those employer services.
Is there any parts of the funds right now that are used for transportation and agreement with ART to get a special fee or? Because I know the transportation and childcare is always a challenge.
So through what's allowable in our support and service contract for eligible people, yes. But that's a small fraction of it.
Because that's a key point.
Couldn't agree with you more. Especially childcare. Childcare is just an enormous barrier to getting, what we don't talk about a lot is not just labor force, but the participation rate of that labor force. And how can we make a dent in that number if you had better access to not just for quality childcare, for that contingent that's got, children in that age range that are preschool. That's a huge question, but that's something that's going to probably need to be solved on a federal level before we can do anything even coming close to approaching answering that question.
Yes, so John and I have had some great conversations regarding this and talked about self-sufficiency and developing those revenue streams. One of the things that occurred to me is the airport and other entities like WeWork are creating these spaces for work, where you have a dedicated space, you go in and work, and you have your laptop and other supplies and support there. How amazing would it to be an innovator in that space and not only have the workspace, but also the other resources that we bring to bear as career source candidates, where people can access those, and maybe in addition to that, include childcare. Most moms or dads that have those dependent children have a space that's kind of novel in that they have a space to work, but also have childcare included as an integral part of that. And there is, it's either private pay or funded through some other resource. So I don't know, just kind of spitballing, but as a builder and as an entrepreneur, that's kind of what really came to mind for me. Who better to do a workspace than in career source calculation?
But they would still pay a fee for the workspace, so the workspace includes childcare.
So I think that's another great data point that we should look at, is have conversations with Embark or USF about their capacity. And, you know, do they have wait lists? Are there entrepreneurs that are looking for a space that can't get it because they're on a wait list or something like that? Again, so as not to compete, but as a complement, I think is a really, I never thought about it.
But that ties into the child development classes they have. Because I think at USF, they have the school where the students actually doing the training.
Yeah.
So that could be something that we could do as well.
IKEA has great.
Do they really?
IKEA? Oh, that's the storage you buy. You just got them up IKEA.
It's funny, I worked in Colorado, our workforce center had drop-in play care. So anybody that was there, that had to come in and do their job search or do anything related to it, we had a resource. It wasn't daycare, but it allowed them, wouldn't solve their problem when they got the job, but when they were looking for the job, we were able to offset some of that issue.
So I'm not going to suggest this as a specific idea, but I thought it was a great thing that I saw, and I'll just share it. So I went to Tennessee and a conference, and one of the things we did was a site visit. And we ended up going to this place. There was a nonprofit organization, and they were an immigrants' rights group. And their work was advocacy. And the thing that they did was to create an event space. So they created this beautiful place with all these murals and playgrounds attached to it and everything else that the public used. And they rented the space to the public for these types of activities, because there's a lack of those kinds of spaces, particularly in minority communities. Places to gather, places to share, with your family and also the larger public. I thought it was a very interesting juxtaposition of an immigrant rights group creating an event space. I'm thinking about us and our targets, and I'm thinking about who it is that we're trying to reach, young people, right? So I'm thinking, what if, Career Source was able to merge these two things in some unusual way? I'm not suggesting this event space, but I'm saying, are there things that we can look at that are of interest to our target group, that assets that we have can be used, right, to attract them into a space that then engages us in a different way.
Are you going to show us other data, or is this just a discussion?
Discussion only.
And are you thinking about what I'll call an episodic business or a scalable business, as you put this together?
Scalable.
Well, if you are, then there are probably other elements of scale that need to be considered, right? I mean, there's, because it means you kind of got to get real narrow in what you want to do, and then as you build success from there, you kind of build it out.
Yes, this is the very initial discussion. So we're exploring, with our legal counsel, what that looks like. There needs to be a divergence from part of the organization for tax purposes. If we want to have an ad hoc committee for the board to drive it and creation of it. So it's really just the very initial stages of looking at research and looking at ideas, and also getting the board buy-in and interest in going on.
There's a lot of things that you don't have to build again. I mean, every company here goes through adding new business units and things like that. And there's typically 4 or 5 things that you look at that are, if the business is built to scale or not. And you might want to think about those elements as well, rather than, as you narrow this thing down.
What ones do you have?
Well, there are 5 that I work with in my business. And the first is false positives. There's a lot of times where false positives kind of lead people to think that there's a bigger business than there is. The second is the size of the market has to be captured. You know, how big a marketplace do you want to go after, and is it out there? Does success beyond the pilot depend on unscalable elements, things that you can't replicate? What do I mean by that? That's where people have relationships, you know, that make something easy to come together, but at scale that can't happen. Does the implementation of the idea generate unintended consequences, spillovers? You know, in other words, and I'm thinking about that in the context of the gentleman who left us, Dan. You know, if that work is gonna change in 2 years, that's a spillover that needs to be considered by your organization. And the last one is supply side economics, because a lot of times people get into these things thinking, well, I can leverage my costs down the road. I think you and I had that conversation a year ago or whenever we last had it. And, you know, sometimes those need to be really tested. So, generally when businesses fail, or new business departments, new codes, if you will, inside companies, they fail because of one of those 5 things. So that's, you know, I'll give Michelle this or somebody this, because I actually work on companies with this stuff. But it's you have to get from ideation to ideas pretty quickly, and then sort of get the team. So if you're going to put a group together, that's probably the right way to begin to approach it.
Any other thoughts? I know Kate has something.
I would say just one thing too, and keep in mind the reason for the research, for lack of a better phrase. It's not necessarily to drive profits, right? It's to add additional revenue to help a broader swath of businesses and job seekers. I mean, that's really, you know, we do some of it now, but we've got some things built in, like Ticket to Work and some of those institutional things that, quite frankly, are going to change and be less impactful over time. So, as an organization, understanding what Ron talked about and what we talk about a lot is funding being level, but particularly in a place like Tampa where more and more people, you know, it's an immigration point. So being able to generate different revenue sources that, number one, are unrestricted, so we don't have to worry about eligibility, so to speak, to be able to, because there's a large contingent of folks, particularly for work-based learning services or subsidized solutions that won't qualify, that should. You know, you're middle class, you're single, you know, you're a single mom that has 2 kids that makes $40,000 a year. She won't qualify. So how can we get, you know, how can we identify and serve that group of individuals as well? I think it's critically important for us to have our finger on the pulse.
Michelle, you already asked the second question about expanding revenue sources. Okay. So no other fee for service types of ideas?
Well, I think we'll get them, Kay, as we get information, data back from the survey. But what, you know, and I'm just using experience from what I've done in the past and what colleagues have done. You know, there's boards that provide payroll services to small employers. All, you know, things that can, again, generate revenue, but come at a competitive advantage for small employers because they may not cost as much as Workday or Paylocity. You know, finding where the gaps are is going to be really important. I know that some of those questions are asked in the survey. We can fulfill the need, not just, again, it's not just being about a board that relies on one source of funding that only serves a specific group of people. It's being more attentive to your community and all the needs that come with it. And if we're a board that's only focused on what we get from Washington, I think we're doing our job.
Does the survey assume target, are you asking questions about targeted costing? Or?
Yeah.